The Evolution of Living Things. Section 2. How does evolution happen? Key concept. After making observations and analyzing evidence, Charles Darwin concluded that natural selection is the mechanism of evolution.
As you read this section, keep in mind what you will learn. Darwin made many observations and was influenced by ideas from other fields. The 4 parts of natural selection are overproduction, inherited variation, struggle to survive, and successful reproduction. Why it matters. Natural selection causes populations to change, to become better adapted to their environment. In this section, you will learn the following new vocabulary. Trait, selective breeding, natural selection.
Imagine that you are a scientist in the 1800s. Fossils of some very strange animals have been found. How would you explain the existence of these fossils? In the 1800s, geologists began to realize that Earth was much older than anyone had previously thought. Evidence showed that gradual processes had changed Earth's surface over millions of years. Some scientists saw evidence of evolution in the fossil record. However, no one had been able to explain how evolution happens until Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin. In 1831, 21-year-old Charles Darwin, shown in Figure 1, graduated from college. Darwin didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. Although he eventually earned a degree in theology, Darwin was most interested in the study of plants and animals. So he signed on for a 5-year voyage around the world. He served as the naturalist, a scientist who studies nature, on the HMS Beagle, a British ship similar to the ship in Figure 1. During the trip, Darwin made observations that helped him form a theory about how evolution happens. Darwin's Journey. The Beagle's journey is shown in Figure 2. Darwin observed plants and animals from places such as the Galapagos Islands. These islands are found 965 kilometers, or 600 miles, west of Ecuador, a country in South America. Darwin's finches. Darwin noticed that the animals and plants on the Galapagos Islands were like those in Ecuador, but the plants and animals were not identical. For example, the finches on the Galapagos Islands differed slightly from the finches in Ecuador, and the finches on each island differed from the finches on the other islands. One difference between the finches was the shape of their beaks. As Figure 3 shows, the beak of each finch is adapted to the way the bird usually gets food. Darwin's thinking. Darwin puzzled over the animals that he had seen on his journey. He tried to explain why some of the animals, such as the Galapagos finches, were very similar yet had unique adaptations. Darwin hypothesized that the island finches descended from South American finches. He proposed that the first finches on the islands were blown there from South America by a storm. He suggested that the finches evolved adaptations for the various island environments over many generations. For example, Darwin noticed that the shape of the beak was directly related to the finch's food. Darwin's hypothesis about the Galapagos finches explained his observations. Ideas about breeding. In Darwin's time, farmers and breeders had produced many kinds of farm animals and plants. These plants and animals had traits that were desired by the farmers and breeders. A trait is a form of an inherited characteristic. For example, redness is a trait, and fruit color is the corresponding characteristic. The practice by which humans select plants or animals for breeding based on desired traits is selective breeding. Most pets, such as the dogs in Figure 4, have been bred for various desired traits. Selective breeding shows that the traits of organisms can change and that certain traits can spread through populations. Ideas about population. During Darwin's time, Thomas Malthus wrote an essay on the principle of population. Malthus noted that the human population can grow more rapidly than food supplies can grow. Figure 5 shows this relationship. Malthus also pointed out that the size of human populations is limited by problems such as starvation and disease. After reading Malthus's work, Darwin realized that any species can produce many offspring. He also knew that the populations of all species are limited by starvation, disease, competition, and predation. Only a limited number of individuals live long enough to reproduce. Darwin reasoned that the survivors had traits that helped them survive in their environment. He also thought that some of these traits would be inherited by the offspring of the survivors. Ideas about Earth's history. During Darwin's time, most geologists thought that Earth was very young. But important books, such as Principles of Geology by Charles Lyell, were changing ideas about Earth. Lyell's book presented evidence that Earth had formed by natural processes over a long period of time. Darwin reasoned that if Earth were very old, then there would be enough time for organisms to slowly change. Darwin's theory of natural selection. After his voyage on the HMS Beagle, Darwin privately struggled with his ideas for about 20 years. Then, in 1858, Darwin received a letter from a naturalist named Alfred Russel Wallace. Wallace had arrived at the same ideas about evolution that Darwin had. In 1859, Darwin published a famous book called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. In his book, Darwin proposed the theory that evolution happens by natural selection. Natural selection is the mechanism or process by which organisms that are better adapted to their environment survive and reproduce more successfully than less well-adapted organisms do. The process has 4 steps and is genetics and evolution. Darwin knew that organisms inherit traits, but not how they inherit traits. He also knew that there is great variation among organisms, but not how that variation occurs. Today, scientists know that variation happens as genetic information is passed from parent to offspring in sexual reproduction. Some genes make an organism more likely to survive to reproduce. Natural selection happens when organisms that carry these genes survive and reproduce more than organisms that do not carry these genes. New fossil discoveries and new information about genes add to scientists' understanding of natural selection and evolution.